Okay, so today I'm going to be doing two spoiler-free reviews. We're going to start with this book, The Secret Garden by Frances Hodgson Burnett. This is a classic book. I age range, classify all of the classics that I read as adult books, so adult classic book. We'll get into this very soon. After that, I will then do a spoiler-free review of this book, The Lost Apothecary by Sarah Penner. This is an adult historical fiction that I finished moments before doing this video. Let's get right into the spoiler-free reviews. Starting off with The Secret Garden by Frances Hodgson Burnett. So in case you were wondering about this specific edition, this is a HarperCollins interactive edition of this book. I have a couple of other editions within this series, and some of you have inquired about it. I purchased mine from Amazon, so that's where I would recommend you go if you'd like a copy for yourself. And since you guys have requested it, one day I will do a HarperCollins interactive editions video where I take more time to discuss my HarperCollins interactive editions. But for today, we're focusing on the content within the book as opposed to the edition of this book. So, The Secret Garden by Frances Hodgson Burnett is an adult classic book, and I've given this book 5 stars. The spoiler-free premise of this book is that, well, we open up with Mary Lennox, who was born and lives in India. She is a little girl. I honestly don't remember how old she is, but she is left in the company of some servants most of the time because her parents don't have time for her. So because Mary Lennox is growing up with servants all around her, she is growing into a very spoilt and rude child. One day, unfortunately owing to cholera, both of her parents end up dying, and Mary is quite forgotten about. She's not found for a couple of days in her nursery, and then when she's found, she's told what has happened, and she is sent away to the next living relative that there is, which is her uncle, Mr. Craven, who lives in Misselthwaite Manor all the way over in London, which is very different culturally speaking to India. So Mary has to equate herself to life at Misselthwaite Manor as well as life in London in a new area. She is picked up from London Station by the housekeeper, whose name is Mrs. Medlock. Mrs. Medlock informs Mary very early on in their carriage ride home to Misselthwaite that her uncle will have no time for her because he doesn't really have a lot of time for anyone, and so he won't bother himself with you. You'll be left to your own devices and you'll need to entertain yourself. So a fine welcome for our dear Mary Lennox. Eventually, Mary ends up learning a couple of things, and one thing that I can say is that Mary learns of a secret garden that once existed but is no longer accessible because it has been locked. It was locked 10 years ago when Mr. Craven's wife died. Mary doesn't know where the garden is, let alone where the lock is, where the key is. She doesn't know how to find this garden, but she is plagued by the thoughts of the desperation of wanting to get into this garden, and many different things do happen along the way. This, while a plot-driven story, has an amazing character arc for both Mary and another character that I'm just going to say their name is Colin. I can't say much about Colin because anything I say is going to be a spoiler, and it was just really, really well done, and that's putting it objectively. Thinking about it subjectively, this is such a beautiful book. Oh my goodness, you guys. I have read a lot of fantasy with dark elements. I've read a lot of books that have these darker elements, darker feelings, darker culture, serious nature, whether it's politically driven or dystopian type books or horrors or thrillers or whatever. This book is your remedy for being bogged down in a whole lot of darkness with books. If you want something to just refresh you, you can't go past The Secret Garden. It is just so beautifully not only written, but the story itself is just so so beautiful. Oh my goodness. I did not cry, but I was on the verge of tears so many times. I buddy read this book over on my Discord server, and I was writing comments as I was going along and buddy reading with some people, and it was such a fun experience because while other people on my buddy reads Discord were saying things to me like, oh, I didn't expect it was going to be like this, I thought it would be something different, here's me going, oh my god, and then this happened. I was just so overwhelmed, but in such a good way. Oh, it was just so good. Boy, did this book have all the feels for me in just how beautiful it is. And it focuses on, the culture of the world that we are in this fictional tale is so beautiful. When we think of the beauty that is nature and the beauty that is animals, and I guess the simplicity of beautiful nature and beautiful animals can give you some idea as to what makes this book as beautiful as it is. And I'll stop saying the word beautiful now, but it really was. I highly, highly, highly recommend this book. I fully believe that Frances Hodgson Burnett did an amazing job. I can't highly recommend this book enough. I do want to make a very quick point. Some classics are incredibly tough to get into because of the writing style, because of how things were written back in the day. This, at least this edition of this book, was not at all hard for me to read. It was very easy to get into. Now, there is a language spoken that is a variation of English known as Yorkshire within the book, but the Yorkshire language is explained really well, that it's easy to get to the point of saying, oh, okay, I get what they're saying. You can infer from what is, from the whole thing that's being said, what it is they're trying to say. 5 overwhelming stars from me. The next book that I'm going to do a spoiler-free review on is this book, The Lost Apothecary by Sarah Penner. Before we begin, even with the stats, we're going to drink in this gorgeous cover. How beautiful is this cover, you guys? So, I actually had to get this edition delivered to me from the US because anytime I tried to find this book where I live in Melbourne, no one had it. They said they could order it in, but they all said the same thing. We can get it in for you, that's not a problem, but we can't get the purple edition in for you. We can get in this thing, which I didn't want. I wanted this one. So this is a book that is a new release for 2021. I discovered this book in December of 2020 when I was writing down books on my most anticipated list of new releases for this year. And I was incredibly excited to read this book because of the premise, which we'll get into in just a moment. So now to the very quick stats. The Lost Apothecary by Sarah Penner is an adult historical fiction that I am giving... I just finished reading it, so I really don't want to lock in a star rating. Oh, dash it all. I'm giving it 4.5 stars. Fine. Which is better than I was going to give it. I was going to give it 4, so that's, bumping it up. Historical fictions for me are generally hit or miss. I have not read a lot. I am definitely not well read within this genre subject. So please do be mindful of that. Last year I read, I read 3 historical fiction books. Once by Morris Gleitzman, The Shadow of the Wind by Carlos Ruiz Zafón, and The Book Thief by Marcus Zusak. Wow, I had to think there. And that's because Once and The Book Thief I rated incredibly low. I just was really disappointed with both of them. The Shadow of the Wind is right here. Right there. By Carlos Ruiz Zafón. This book will not leave me because it is my very first 5-star historical fiction. But I've only read the 3. Now I've read 4. In saying that I'm not well read and that historical fictions can go either way for me, ultimately, I loved this book. So the premise of this book is that it revolves around 3 characters. It is multi-perspective, with 3 different character perspectives and dual perspective with time, then and now. So it's really a really complex writing style, not the writing itself, but the stylized multi-perspective that is done. So we follow 2 characters from the past and in their timeline in the past, and 1 character in the present. And so I've read multi-perspectives before where we have 3 or more characters in a book and chapters alternate with them. That's fine. I've read then and now books where we alternate chapters between the past and the present then the past. I had yet to be in a position where I'd read a multi-perspective character book with multi-perspective characters that was also then and now, that also had 2 characters from the past and 1 from the present. So that took me a little bit of time to wrap my head around. So I started reading this book physically. I read the first 2 chapters, but by the time I got halfway through the 2nd chapter, I was convinced, you guys, I was convinced that I was going to DNF this book. Oh my gosh. I just couldn't deal with the multi-perspectives as well as the writing style from Sarah Penner. Her writing was incredibly descriptive and I just didn't like the way that it was done. So I then decided to switch over to the audiobook version while reading along with the book. I wanted to still read the book somehow, especially because I want to get myself more acquainted with historical fiction. So I was listening to the audiobook while reading along with the book. I don't always do that. Sometimes I'll physically read. Sometimes I'll listen to the audiobook without reading the physical book. I might crochet or something else or color in or whatever. But this time I specifically listened to the audiobook while reading along in the book itself. And this was just the best thing I could have done for myself, because the audiobook did for me what just physically reading it on its own could not do for me. Allow me to just, allow the words to flow from the audio, narrators, the voice actors, and just follow along in the book. And in the end, it became a real breeze to read. I could have just stopped the audiobook at any time, but I was really starting to love the voice actors in the audiobook that I kept going. But yeah, it was a good decision. So once again, just to hit home, audiobook listening is still reading. From the 3rd chapter onwards, I was thinking, okay, this is interesting. And it's what I thought it would be. We are going to get to the premise in a minute. It's what I thought it would be. But it's not really going anywhere fast. It's just kind of mulling around a little bit here and there. But then, once we got going, oh my goodness, was this an amazing ride. So that is what I want to lead off with, by saying to you guys, please be mindful, it is a very slow beginning. Not only does Sarah Penner take her time to introduce us to these different characters in their own separate eras, the 2 from the past and the 1 from the present, but we get to know them really well. And then once we get to know them really well, we get to learn even more about them really well. And then once we get a really firm grasp of who everyone is, then boom, out of the gate we run, and it just becomes a wild ride from there. Please read through the slog because it is worth it. Oh my goodness. So the premise of this book is that we are following Nella and Eliza from the past. Nella runs an apothecary shop, which is a hidden away shop that no one except for those in the know are even aware of that exists. She runs this shop in order to aid women, one, to help with healing and health benefits with her apothecary for women, but also poisoning and stuff like that to get revenge or whatever on men for women. I loved this. I absolutely loved this. And I know this is going to sound so wrong, but had this been the opposite, had this been a book run by men to aid men, who were wanting to either get health benefits or try and kill women. I would have been so flat out against it, and I know that's wrong. But the fact that it was for women, I loved it. It was so good, especially for that period in time where women were treated so differently. Well done. Just so well done. So that's Nella. She runs the shop. Very early on, Nella has the youngest customer that she's ever met by the name of Eliza, who's around 12, 13, somewhere around there. She's really young. She goes in to pick up a tincture for her mistress. Eliza comes to get to know Nella really, really well and ends up assisting her. We also follow the now perspective, which is Caroline. Caroline lives in the US. She has recently found out that her husband has had an affair with... So Caroline goes on her own to this hotel in London to take some time for herself to try and figure out what it is she's going to do. She ends up meeting a guy who tells her that he does something called mudlurking. Caroline uncovers a potion bottle that has the symbol of a bear on it, which ends up linking back to Nella and Eliza. I won't say how because that is a spoiler, but let me tell you, from the moment we actually get out of the gates and start running with this story, it is a wild ride. It is a hidden gem. I don't know if you can call a 2021 new release book a hidden gem, but I'm going to call it a hidden gem because I haven't seen it anywhere. I'm giving it 4.5 stars because I really did not appreciate the slow beginning. And I did not appreciate Sarah Penner's writing style. It was a struggle for me to read to the point that I had to make the decision to switch over to audiobook. Otherwise, I definitely would have DNF'd this book. The audiobook saved this book. So a very quick shout out to the narrators. I don't remember their names, but the narrators that were doing the audiobook did an amazing job, and I highly recommend the audiobook. They did a wonderful, wonderful, wonderful job. But this book is just incredible. I cannot recommend it enough. I read 2 amazing books in this past week, and I am just so happy. This month is just going so well for me. So let's hope, not heap, let's hope that that pattern does continue. But that is where I am going to leave it. Letting you guys go with peace, blessings, and so much love. I post videos every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, and I'll see you again soon. Mwah! Thank you so much for watching, and happy reading!